Frank's temporary residence in the opulent Ikoyi mansion felt less like a visit and more like a permanent vigil. The sprawling estate, owned by his elder brother, Eugene, hummed with a quiet luxury that only amplified Marianne's solitude. Eugene, a well-placed executive in an oil services firm, was on a 6-month mission in Seychelles, leaving his stunning wife, Marianne, in the care of his younger brother. Marianne was a vision in her own right, a woman whose beauty was matched by an almost heartbreaking melancholy that Frank couldn't ignore. Every evening, Frank would watch her pace the marble floors or sit silently by the infinity pool, her gaze fixed on the lagoon, a quiet sorrow clouding her remarkable eyes. They were separated by the simple, terrible fact of her wedding ring, a solid band of platinum that felt like a chastity belt wrapped around Frank's own heart. Their conversations started innocently enough, discussing their handsome 5-year-old nephew Dan and the state of the garden. But soon these chats morphed into hours-long exchanges about life, dreams, and unspoken desires that curled into the air between them like the expensive cigar smoke Frank occasionally enjoyed on the veranda. The tension was a palpable, suffocating heat in the Lagos air, heavier than the humidity. Frank knew he was playing with fire, yet he couldn't resist the allure of the forbidden. He found himself rearranging his day simply to be near her, to catch the subtle scent of her perfume, and to hear the low, captivating timbre of her voice. He was falling, and the drop felt infinitely intoxicating and dangerous. The intimacy between them deepened with terrifying speed, fueled by Eugene's extended absence and Marianne's increasing vulnerability. One afternoon, while reviewing Dan's homework in the sun-drenched study, Marianne confessed the hollow feeling of her marriage, a quiet admission that shattered Frank's remaining sense of fraternal loyalty. She never spoke ill of Eugene directly, but her silence on certain topics, and the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when his name was mentioned, spoke volumes. Frank didn't need to be told about his brother's persistent careless affairs. He had covered for Eugene often enough during their younger, wilder days. Now, seeing the direct emotional cost of that recklessness on Marianne, Frank felt a burning, protective rage mixed with his burgeoning desire. He began taking over tasks Eugene neglected, driving Dan to his exclusive Lekki school and fixing the intricate German espresso machine that had been broken for weeks. These mundane acts felt intensely domestic and dangerously suggestive of a life they could share. One evening, Marianne showed Frank a box of old photographs, laughing at a silly picture of Eugene from his university days. Her unguarded, genuine laughter was a sound Frank realized he desperately needed to hear. As their fingers brushed over the faded print, a powerful electrical current snapped between them, causing them both to draw back instantly, eyes locked in mutual recognition of their escalating emotional infidelity. The unspoken admission hung between them, confirming that the line between brotherly concern and outright passion was now dangerously thin, threatening to disappear entirely. The air in the Ikoyi residence was thick and breathless the night the line nearly dissolved. Marianne had arranged an elegant dinner for two, a quiet, candlelit affair on the veranda overlooking the now darkened lagoon. The excuse was simple, celebrating Dan's outstanding school report. But the reality was far more complex. The Shiraz was rich and flowed too freely, lowering the careful defenses they had meticulously constructed. Marianne wore a flowing silk dress that caught the soft light, and Frank couldn't tear his gaze away from the graceful curve of her neck. As the hours passed, they stopped talking about Dan and the weather, and instead discussed the concept of fate and the cruelty of timing. Frank confessed a regret about a major career decision he had made years ago, and Marianne, emboldened by the wine, countered with a profound, aching lament about choices made in youth that defined an unhappy future.
Their chairs were too close, and the rhythmic sound of the waves felt like an insistent, tempting drumbeat. Frank reached across the table to touch her hand, intending a gesture of platonic comfort. But when his skin met hers, the world narrowed to just the two of them. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, their bodies meeting in a dizzying moment of recognition. His heart hammered a violent rhythm against his ribs. He saw the same reckless desperation in her eyes before he lowered his head. The forbidden fruit was practically within reach, its taste already anticipated on his tongue, promising both ecstasy and utter devastation.
Just as their lips were about to meet, a loud, piercing cry from the house ripped through the charged silence, causing them to freeze instantly. It was Dan, jolted awake by a sudden vivid nightmare. The sound was like a bucket of icy water, shattering the glamorous, dangerous illusion they had built on the veranda. Marianne gasped, her eyes wide with shock and guilt, instantly pulling away from Frank's grasp. The heavy weight of reality and the unforgivable nature of their near betrayal descended on them both. She immediately hurried inside, murmuring an apology Frank barely heard, her silk dress rustling as she vanished into the shadows of the hallway. Frank remained rooted to the spot, his hands still suspended in the air where he had held her waist, his body trembling with frustrated longing and crushing self-loathing. He realized then the true stakes of their game. They were not just risking their own hearts, but the integrity of a family, and the innocence of the little boy whose frightened cry had just saved them. When Marianne returned 10 minutes later, composed but with eyes that were deeply shadowed, she didn't meet his gaze. She simply cleared the remaining wine glasses and spoke in a low, firm voice that allowed no argument. "Frank, this cannot happen again. Eugene is my husband. Dan is our son. This fruit is forbidden, and we will not consume it. We have to be better than this." Her words were a final, painful boundary, yet the knowledge of what they both truly wanted remained, burning fiercely beneath the veneer of familial propriety. Marianne's painful rejection, though principled, forced Frank into an agonizing introspection. He knew she was right, and that staying close would only lead to inevitable ruin. He decided the only way to save himself and protect her family was to create an unassailable distance. It was during a high-stakes meeting at his own thriving real estate firm that he met Cynthia. She was the head of a major architectural firm, brilliantly analytical, effortlessly chic, and possessed a radiant confidence that demanded respect. Cynthia was the perfect antidote to the suffocating emotional complexity of the Ikoyi mansion. Their courtship was swift, public, and refreshingly uncomplicated. Cynthia represented clarity and a forward-looking future. Frank saw her as a potential lifeline, a new beginning untainted by the shadow of his brother's marriage. However, the true motivation for his rapid commitment solidified 2 weeks later when Eugene called from Singapore, a new unlisted stop on his mission, not to check on Marianne, but to gleefully recount a recent romantic escapade with a local translator. Eugene's brazen and titled disregard for his wife was the final straw. Frank hung up the phone, a cold resolve settling in his heart. He was done waiting for his brother to act honorably. His path was now clear. He would commit to Cynthia and simultaneously find a way to make Eugene accountable, thus protecting Marianne from Eugene's continued casual cruelty, even if it meant burying his own desires forever.
The news of Frank's engagement to Cynthia Nwachukwu broke across the Lagos social scene like a sudden thunderstorm. The announcement, featuring a dazzling emerald-cut diamond and a glossy magazine spread, was met with stunned silence from Marianne. She had expected him to leave the Ikoyi house, but she hadn't expected him to replace her quite so swiftly or with such a formidable woman.
The wedding was fast-tracked, setting society tongues wagging. Marianne maintained a facade of perfect composure, congratulating Frank with forced cheerfulness and even offering to help plan the reception at the Ikoyi Hotel. Her assistance was meticulous, cold, and utterly professional. Frank observed her, knowing the pain she hid behind the polished smile, a reciprocal ache twisting in his own chest. They shared one final, excruciating moment alone in the ballroom, where Cynthia insisted Frank taste cake samples. Marianne was folding linen napkins nearby, and for a fleeting second their eyes met. It wasn't desire that flashed between them this time, but a profound, mutual recognition of a deep love that could never be realized, a shared grief over the life they would not have. It was a silent goodbye, a wordless agreement to honor the new respectable boundary Frank had violently erected. He tasted the lemon sponge, nodded approvingly, and offered Marianne a mechanical thank you. That single, honest look was more devastating than any kiss could have been, confirming that even with Cynthia's ring on his finger, his heart still carried a scar shaped precisely like his brother's wife.
Eugene returned from his extended mission 2 weeks before Frank's wedding, tanned, rested, and utterly oblivious to the emotional warfare that had nearly detonated in his own home. He arrived with expensive, duty-free gifts, immediately launching into boastful tales of his international successes and, carelessly, a few thinly veiled references to his conquests. It was this arrogant disregard that finally ignited Frank's resolve. Seizing an opportune moment, when Eugene was nursing a glass of expensive cognac in the study, Frank shut the heavy mahogany doors and confronted him. "You need to stop this, Eugene," Frank stated, his voice low and dangerous. Eugene laughed dismissively, but his amusement vanished when Frank delivered the stunning blow. "I know about the translator in Singapore and the architect in Dubai. You think Marianne doesn't feel your indifference? Look at your wife, man. Look at your son." Frank hadn't just guessed. He used the fragments of information he'd covered for in the past and the recent drunken phone call to make a devastatingly accurate accusation. The color drained from Eugene's face. The scandal wasn't Frank's desire for Marianne, but the public professional humiliation Eugene would face if his powerful, socially connected younger brother exposed his true behavior. Frank leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper of steel. "You almost lost everything. Not to me, but to your own selfishness. Fix it, Eugene, or I will not be the one who stands between you and your ruin." The threat was clear, forcing Eugene to finally see the true devastating cost of his casual adultery.
Frank and Cynthia's wedding was a masterpiece of social brilliance, a testament to Lagos high society. It was widely praised as the event of the year, all opulent design and impeccable taste. Marianne, looking breathtakingly regal, served as a graceful, supportive sister-in-law, holding Dan's hand as he scattered rose petals down the aisle. Eugene, surprisingly subdued, spent the entire day glued to Marianne's side, holding her hand with an unfamiliar, earnest intensity. The confrontation had shaken him to his core, forcing him to face the reality of his family's vulnerability and the depth of Frank's moral stand. He had won the war for Eugene's soul, if not Marianne's heart. In the months that followed, Eugene's transformation was startling. He canceled unnecessary trips, focused intently on Dan's life, and, most importantly, began treating Marianne with the deep, respectful affection she deserved. Their mansion, once a lonely cage for Marianne, now felt like a home. One Sunday afternoon, as Frank and Cynthia visited for brunch, Frank passed Marianne on the staircase. They paused, sharing a brief, mature glance that held a complex mix of past desire, current acceptance, and mutual, silent gratitude. They had walked right up to the edge of the abyss, and, finding the strength in a child's cry and a brother's threat, had chosen life, stability, and respect instead. The forbidden fruit remained untouched, but the sweetness of the ultimate sacrifice had guaranteed the happiness of all three families.